Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. Our topic tonight is sterilization and consent. With me is Antonia Hernandez, an attorney with the Los Angeles Center for Law and Justice. Also with me is Claudia Dreifus, a journalist for such publications as The Progressive, The Nation, McCalls, Rolling Stone, and many others. Claudia was recently awarded a grant from the Fund for Investigative Journalism to write on the issue of forced sterilization. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
I think we should define our terms immediately. Claudia, what kind of sterilization procedures are available?
Well, there are really three kinds that are used, be they forced or not forced. That is, there are two kinds of tubal ligations. You can have an ordinary tubal ligation where if you are a woman, a doctor performs an incision into the abdomen and cuts the tubes, the fallopian tubes, and then ties them, and then one is rendered effectively sterile. Or there can be what they call the band-aid tubal ligation, the laparoscopy, where they inflate the abdomen with gas and then burn and cauterize the fallopian tubes, and that too leaves one sterile. The third possibility is hysterectomy for sterilization. But the point is that neither of these really three procedures are terribly safe or good, and that they're quite dangerous. They're probably more dangerous than long-term use of the pill or the IUD, and they're even more dangerous and really harmful to people when people are coerced into that, which is what's been happening in Los Angeles and all over the country.
There was a case recently called the Ralph case, I think, which really was the first time the media gave this topic any consideration and really brought it to a lot of people's attention. And Tony, can you tell us a little bit about the Ralph case?
Well, what happened was, I believe this was in South Carolina. There was the sterilization of two young women. One was 14 and one was 15. Federal funds were used for the sterilization of these two young women, and as a consequence of that, because the funds were federal, HEW, the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, and because of a lawsuit brought by the father of the two children, HEW now has a regulation, a guideline, that states that no federal funds will be used for the sterilization of women under 21.
So was that the only violation in that case, though? The use of federal funds?
No, there's been other violations. That you really cannot cite and know the exact number of violations. I am familiar also with the Pierce case. That also was publicized. It's a case in, I also believe it's South Carolina, where a doctor made it mandatory that a condition of him rendering his services, the woman, if she was on welfare, would have to consent to sterilization. And then, of course, the case I'm involved with, and this is in Los Angeles.
Right, we'll talk about that a little bit later.
All right.
What I'd like you to do, though, is to list the violations, because I want to be absolutely clear about that.
Well, as I understand, what has been happening is that in a lot of cases, a lot of the women are approached as to whether or not they want to be sterilized during labor. And in other cases where the abuse is outrageous, is that they don't even bother to obtain the consent of the women.
Yeah, what's been going on all over the country, not just in LA or in the South, but probably at inner city and teaching hospitals all over the country, is that when women go in to give birth to children or for an abortion or in situations of stress, they are approached by doctors and asked if they want to get their tubes tied. Now, tube tying is already a complete misnaming of the operation tubal ligation, because they don't just tie your tubes, they tie and cut them, and people think that that's a reversible operation. Very often the women who go into the hospitals don't speak English, don't know the language, and certainly don't know that tubes can't be untied or retied. And what's been happening is that women go in under the most extreme situations of stress, which childbirth is, and they're asked, do you want to get your tubes tied? If they don't know what it is, or if they're told it's a temporary procedure, they often consent. And it's happening in epidemic proportions. I think I have some proof of it. The LA case is the most dramatic case because there are 11 women involved, as Antonia will tell you more about, who were sterilized without their knowledge, in some cases, or against their will, under tremendous conditions of coercion, and it's just not unique. It's
Okay,
happening.
before we talk about Antonia's, the 11 women in Antonia's case, it's HEW, Health, Education and Welfare, who is the regulatory agency that controls this, right? I mean, they wrote the guidelines and so on and have the power to enforce.
Well, HEW only comes in when federal funds are used. And I want to clarify this. Federal funds are used in most cases of low-income families, or in cases where the families, the women, are either receiving public assistance or are lower class people who qualify for Medicaid. Now, whenever either of these two programs come into play, then federal funds are used. And it is then that the federal regulations, the federal guidelines for the sterilization come into play and should be followed.
What are the guidelines?
Okay. It's sort of, HW has taken the position of doing it piecemeal. As a consequence of the Ralph Sisters case, we had what we know is the moratorium. That is, no federal funds should be used for the sterilization of women under 21. Also, as a consequence of the Ralph Sisters case, Judge Gazelle ordered that guidelines consistent with due process be promulgated. They've been in the process of doing that. Also, subsequent to our filing of the suit, the suit I'm involved with, other guidelines have come into play, and at present, these are the guidelines as I understand them. No federal funds should be used for sterilization of women under 21. 2, there should be what we call noticed. And on all consent forms, the notice is that no public assistance funds or no funds will be withdrawn if the individual decides not to be sterilized. There should always be a 72-hour wait between the person signing of the consent form and the actual operation. There also is supposed to be an explanation of the risks, the dangers, the benefits, a total counseling of all alternative type of birth control, and its sterilization is one of the components of birth control. Also, counseling. And as of August 15 of this year, there's also going to be monitoring. That is, all providing hospitals that receive federal funds have to report to HEW the number of sterilizations done. This is going to be done on a quarterly basis. And I think it's progress in the sense that HEW for the first time will be making an attempt to regulate what is actually happening at the hospitals or at the level where the individual comes into contact with the doctors.
Sandy, what's really kind of interesting about the Department of Health, Education and Welfare's whole involvement in this is that it came about after the big scandal with the Ralph Sisters. The Ralph Sisters were 12 and 14 years old and they were sterilized. And that they issued orders, these guidelines, which are in fact have the force of law in 1974. 6 months afterwards, the American Civil Liberties Union sent out a study. Alyssa Krause, who was at that time there, sent out a study to about 150 major teaching hospitals around the country and asked them, are you complying with these guidelines? Are you permitting real informed consent for your patients? And are you actually, not pressuring them? Are you approaching women during labor or not? And this was 6 months after the guidelines were published. Well, the ACLU received back only about a third return on their inquiries, and they found the most amazing thing. They found that there were only about 3 hospitals out of all those 156 they questioned that were in full compliance with the law. 3 out of 156. They also found, and I'll quote from their own study, 36 major teaching hospitals were in non-compliance massively. That's not their quote. And they also said that there were also another 12 who were in non-compliance. And to my knowledge, the Department of Health, Education and Welfare has done very little, if anything, to cut off federal funding from these hospitals. Matter of fact, a lot of the doctors who heard of the ACLU study, the doctors who were heads of OBGYN departments, said They had never even heard of these rules before. It was surprising to them, and it never occurred to them to enforce these laws. So HEW has not done much about publicizing these laws that are very important to save people's psyches, lives, health.
Antonia seems to indicate that they're going to be trying in the near future to some enforcement. But do you think that's going to be enough?
Well, there's a problem in that even if you had enforcement, and it's something I'd like to get into later, you've got the problem of the attitudes of doctors towards the poor, which is incredible, and you've got a problem that it's not one thing that's creating forced sterilization. It's the fact that doctors have a great deal of power to do what they want with patients, and what you've got is indigent patients coming into teaching hospitals, young doctors needing to do all kinds of pelvic operations. After all, gynecology is a surgical specialty. So they're practicing on somebody and they need to do pelvics, and so they encourage tubal ligations. You have the problem that other doctors have very strong attitudes on population, and they have the power to work it out on people. You have the problem that there are other doctors who are racist and who really believe in eugenics. And you have the whole problem of some doctors thinking they're helping women by preventing them from having children they may want to have.
Do you have any proof that some interns in some of the teaching hospitals are doing the operations just for practice?
Well, yeah, I think maybe if we talked about the LA case a little more first,
fine.
I could then get into the proof.
Okay, Antonia, tell us about your 11 women.
Okay, basically our suit is a federal suit. We are suing let me start by saying at the inception who we began to sue and who's left at this point in time. We filed our suit June 18th of this year. We were suing HEW, the state of California, the director and head of LA County Medical Center, and the individual doctors who performed the sterilizations. What it involved is we have 10 women who were sterilized, coercively sterilized. We have one woman who was to be sterilized but was saved last minute. And we have a Chicana organization that's representing the Chicano community of the Southwest, and particularly of California and Los Angeles. What we're seeking, or what we are seeking, was number one, that HEW come up with regulations that we felt were consistent with due process. That is, most of our women are Spanish-speaking Chicanas. They do not speak English. In a lot of our cases, they did not sign consent forms, so we didn't have the problem of consent forms. However, of those few that did sign consent forms, they were written in English. So what we were asking, one of the things was that the consent form, in order to obtain free and voluntary consent, and that is the federal requirement, we felt that it should be in the language the individual understands, in our instance, Spanish. We're also seeking that the consent form be written at a reading level that the individual that goes to these types of hospitals understands. We were also suing the individual doctors for damages. Right now what has happened is, subsequent to our suit, HEW has come up with regulations with clarifications indicating that informed consent means that the consent forms have to be in Spanish. And they have come up with what we call the monitoring. That is, they're going to make the states, the regions, the providers, the hospitals quarterly report as to how many sterilizations are performed using federal funds. How that will work, I don't know. But because of that, HEW is no longer a party defendant. Now we have the state of California, and from them we seek reading level, that is, a reading level that the individual can understand. We're asking, of course, Spanish consent forms. We had our preliminary injunction hearing on October 6th, and the judge has ordered us, the plaintiffs, to come up with a consent form that we feel is at a 6th grade reading level, and we feel that this reading level will be adequate.
Are you going to do that?
Yes, we are in the process right now of coming up with a consent form at the 6th grade reading level.
Antonia, tell me something about the women involved in the suit.
Okay, one of our plaintiffs, a lot of people have misconceptions as to who are the women that are being sterilized. And one of the several of the misconceptions, some of them being that, number one, Coming from the Southwest California, Los Angeles, we have two problems. Most people believe that if you are Chicano, from Mexico, Mexican descent, that you are undocumented, that is, you're illegal. Number two, if and when you are not undocumented, then you are on welfare. All our 11 plaintiffs, and I might state at this point that there are not just 11, I talked to hundreds of women. But of the 11 plaintiffs that we have now, all were married. None were on public assistance. And some had made and paid for private medical arrangements prior to giving birth to their children, but for medical reasons were transferred to LA County Medical Hospital. At one point, a plaintiff of ours, she had complications, was seeing a private physician, had medical insurance that was supposed to cover for her care. However, there was some abnormality. She was 11 months pregnant and was told by her private doctor that she had to go to LA County Medical Center. During labor, they approached her and she negated throughout that she did not want to be sterilized. She didn't know she was sterilized. She did not sign a consent form. She was only 32, only has 2 little girls. As a consequence of the sterilization, there has been some physical injury. She has had to be hospitalized with hemorrhages and bleeding. She suffers from nervousness and is consistently absent-minded. Her marriage has gone down. She had a relationship with a common law marriage relationship with her common law husband of 8 years. He has now walked off her life. She is presently working for a laundry company somewhere for $1.75 an hour and trying to support 2 children.
So really, almost without exception, at least the women involved in the case have had serious marital problems resulting from their sterilization.
Yes, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is the sterilization, coerced involuntary sterilization, does not only involve the woman, but it has far-reaching consequences for the entire marriage, the relationship, the children, the husband. And a lot of these women are going through tremendous marital problems and tragedies because of what has happened.
Claudia, you were going to say something?
Yeah, well, I spoke with many of the plaintiffs in the case, and speaking with them was very much like speaking with rape victims, because they had been violated in a way that they had no control over, and the kind of butchery of their lives was just the most horrible thing to see. I mean, in the middle of interviews, I'm not a terribly emotional person, yet I found myself crying, and because there were such situations. There were women whose marriages could never be the same because both partners had suffered so badly. There were women who had been abused during labor. One woman hit, beaten when she refused the sterilization. There were women who consistently said, "No, I will not be sterilized," and woke up in the morning and discovered that they were. There were other women who found that they never even knew they were sterilized until community organizers approached them and said, "Is there a possibility this might be the case with you?" When they were doing some canvassing of the area to discover how widespread this was. There was one woman who was a plaintiff in a separate case who was sterilized, went back to LA County Medical Center, and had at the same hospital an IUD inserted after her sterilization. But the toll on the people's lives is something that you cannot really imagine. I mean, it's broken lives that'll never be the same. And what really is astounding is the attitudes of the doctors. When I was in LA a couple of months ago...
Is this the proof you promised?
This is the proof I promised. One of the things I did was I went around LA County Medical Center's dormitories for house staff and interns and residents with another physician. And I did not identify myself as a reporter. And what we said is we'd knock on doors like Fuller Brushman and we'd say, "Hi, we're doing an informal study on informed consent. Will you tell us what you've seen at other hospitals where you've done work, where you've interned or done your obstetrics rounds as a medical student?" And we spoke to 23 doctors at LA County. 9 of them had seen hard selling or abuse or had worked under conditions that led to abuse elsewhere. throughout the
Elsewhere
country.
in the country. Yeah.
And LA County is one of the top obstetrics residencies, so you get the best doctors from all over the country coming there. There were only 4 doctors that I spoke to who could say unequivocally that they had worked under conditions that were clean in that way. Yet none of them had spoken up. I mean, they had seen women pushed into operations they didn't want, and nobody said anything. Now, the thing about sterilization is that it's irreversible, except in 10 to 20% of all cases if it's tubal ligations, and then it takes a very expensive, dangerous operation to do it. They had seen women being given operations they didn't need.
What kinds of operations do you mean?
Well,
Hysterectomies, you mean?
well, hysterectomies, because a lot of obstetric surgeons want to graduate up. If you can get to do a tubal ligation, then you've mastered that. Why not do a hysterectomy, which is really dangerous? There's a lot of that. There's a lot of selling unnecessary operations. But what happened when I went around and did this survey was that more and more I talked to the doctors, and there was an absence of any kind of moral judgments about what they saw, let alone a willingness to speak up. And I'd like to read just some of the quotes of some of the doctors that I spoke to, because it illustrates, I don't know what's missing, a sense of humanity about the people they're talking about, treating. I don't know. This was a young physician, very blonde, very smiling. He was sort of the kind of man maybe my mother would have wanted me to marry 10 years ago. I think she would have been delighted. And yet, a doctor, no less, I mean, right? And he sat innocently in his room with a smile that was all pure gold. And he was talking about doing his OBG rounds at a major hospital in Detroit, inner city, so we know the population is black. This is what he said. Most of the population was black, I'm quoting, inner city. We had a lot of young girls come in 13 years old and 16, and they'd have 2 or 3 children. In those cases, we'd ask them, often when they were in labor, if they'd want tubal ligations. There were so many young girls, and they really had a low mentality. We'd tell them about birth control, and they just wouldn't take it. They'd have one baby, and we'd tell them about birth control, and they'd come back again pregnant the next year. 15 or 16-year-olds, it would get some of the residents really mad. So we'd offer them tubal ligations, sometimes during labor. And then he said, with 16-year-olds, you need the parents' permission. This seemed to irritate him a lot. But he said that wasn't hard to get because the parents weren't in labor. Some parents, much to his surprise, he said no because they liked the kids. And in the meantime, there was another intern sitting in the room. He said, you mean you sterilized 16-year-olds? And he said, well, yeah, if they had 2 kids. And it was as if nothing was going on. I mean, abnormal. I spoke to another doctor at LA County who told a woman who told me she had worked at another hospital near LA where they were routinely approaching women in labor, and she did not feel that this was coercive. It's terribly coercive to say to someone in the greatest of human pain, do you want to be sterilized and never have to suffer this pain again?
What happens to the women who agree to it when they're asked well in labor and they agree to it? What happens to them afterward? Do they ever reach a point where they regret it?
The regret rate on sterilization is 30%, and it's really higher.
On any kind or on
there are
what you're
varying
calling
studies.
forced sterilization?
It's somewhere between 15 and 30. It's higher, much higher, among women where the doctor has suggested it first. But what's interesting about this woman, she said she didn't think it was coercive to approach people during labor. And then she said, but then I was down in Nicaragua, and there we really coerced. And I wonder what they were doing down in Nicaragua. But on that, too, a couple of evenings I went over to Martin Luther. Are we running out of time?
We don't have a lot of
Yeah.
time. Let's talk about the fact, Claudia, that you feel that it's a national problem. Do you feel that it's only limited to Chicano women?
No, not at all. And a couple of nights I went over to Martin Luther King Medical Center, which is in Watts, and there were a lot of young interns there who were black and who had studied at institutions that served black populations, and they were very aware of the genocide question. And one evening spoke to 3 interns who had worked at Howard University Medical Center in Washington, D.C., and they saw many Southern blacks coming in through emergency. One doctor told me this: A woman came in through emergency and I noticed she didn't have any children. I asked her why. She said she came from a town in North Carolina. She said her mother was on welfare. In this town, the woman said, they sterilized the daughters of all the women on welfare when they turned 15. Another intern in the room at that point said she was at a school in Mississippi, and 2 young women came in for a checkup, and this is her quote, "One was 16, one was 18. We did a routine pelvic on them. One woman didn't have a uterus, and she didn't know it. The 16-year-old, she'd gone to some hospital and had a child there. The other woman had a tubal ligation, the 18-year-old, and she didn't know it." Now this intern said she had only been at this place in Mississippi for 2 weeks, and she'd run across 2 cases of abuses. The doctors I spoke to, who had come from hospitals all over the country, at Martin Luther King, out of 11, 8 had had some experience with abuse from all over the country.
I think you've established it's a national problem.
Yeah.
And Tony, you were talking earlier, we have only 1 minute, but you were talking about some myths that you felt were very prevalent about sterilization. Can you run those down quickly for us?
Well, I think one of the myths that most people feel is, number one, that the tubes are tied. As a matter of course, they are not tied. The tubes are severed, and then they are tied, and they're tied because if they didn't tie them, you bleed to death. The other myth is that most people feel that if you have more than 3 cesareans, that's the limit. There is no such thing.
Certainly not for Ethel Kennedy.
That's not true, then.
It is not true. 5, 6, it's an individual thing, and it depends on the individual woman. And the other myth is that sterilization or tubal ligation is safe. That is a complete myth. It is one of the most dangerous, and of course hysterectomy being the other most dangerous forms of elective surgery. It is 100% elective.
We have 2 seconds. Is it effective, though, tubal ligation?
No, it's not. There is a failure rate, 1 in 100, but more than that,
Claudia,
it is
we're
dangerous.
out of time. I'm sorry. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for watching, and good night.
Woman was produced by WNED-TV, which is solely responsible for its content, and was funded by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.